Here. Now we have too many chairs. Let's kind of pack it in. Let's sit next to each other. What's happening? And we are live streaming right now. All right, everybody, if you could take your seats, that'd be fantastic. Can you sit in here? Just, okay. Oh, you're going upstairs? If you can kind of pack it in here so we can have a little bit more of an intimate space here. They're getting their last bits of pizza. Well, thanks for coming. I'm Damon Clinkscales. I'm the director of Startup Grind Austin. We do a monthly event series, which is basically a fireside chat with entrepreneurs and investors from our local scene. We have a canonical Austin investor and founder here, the founder of Capital Factory, Joshua Baer. So, thank you for joining us tonight. Let me see here. So just a couple of housekeeping things. So we meet on the second Wednesdays, but it was Thursday this month due to a scheduling issue. But the rest of the year we'll follow that second Wednesday cadence. And if you need to go to the bathroom, it's out of this building or out of this space, and it's down the hall and on the right.
Past the elevators.
Past the elevators. There you go. But thank you to Capital Factory and Josh for allowing us to use this space. It's a beautiful space, and we're really lucky to have a place like Capital Factory in Austin, so grateful for it. We also have a sponsor for our event, Egan Nelson. It's a world-class counsel for startups, so if you need to find a lawyer for your startup, you can talk to Mark Nathan, who's here in the white shirt there, white, blue. He's with that firm, and he's a great guy, so you should talk to him at some point tonight.
And one of the first Capital Factory mentors.
There you go. Now, when was Capital Factory founded?
In 2009.
2009.
He was our Houston representative, although then he moved to Austin.
He got religion and came to Austin. Well, anyway, thanks for coming. Really appreciate it. And I guess we'll kick things off. So the basic format is Josh and I will chat for, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes. Then we'll turn it over to you guys. You'll have a Q&A session with Josh, and then we'll have more time afterwards to sort of hang out and chat to close out the night. So that's the basic format. It's very simple, but it's also really fun. So glad you could make it. All right. This is a new setup. So we've got the comfortable chairs, and then we're in the uncomfortable chairs. It's the way it should be. Although we're higher than you, though. So, well, anyway, thanks for coming, Josh.
Yeah, glad to be here. I was so excited, as you know, to when you took over Startup Grind and to have it restart here in Austin, because I think Startup Grind is it's a great series, a great program. It happens in hundreds of cities all over the world. I think Damon just said almost 500. But in particular, the other reason I really like it and was really something I really was important I wanted to have here at Capital Factory is because it's another connection out to Silicon Valley and out to the rest of the world and other places that, it's another way that we're part of something that's happening in all these other places. And that's really important to me too. So I was really glad to see that. And actually, I think we just found out we're going to be hosting the Startup Grind in Dallas in 2019 now too, at our Dallas space too. So that was like one more check of the box.
You heard it here
Dallas
first.
is moving along.
That's awesome. You heard it here. So that's great, and thanks for mentioning that. So it is a global organization, and when I go to Silicon Valley for their global conference, there's founders from all over the world, but also the directors are from hundreds of different countries, and it's a really awesome experience to just to meet them and to see how they run the chapters in their city. Every city is different, and that's why it's kind of like at the edges there's a lot of autonomy. You can kind of make the events the way you want them to be, but you get some support from HQ. So it's a really cool thing. I think it's been around about 9 years. Well, anyway, let's get started. Just in case folks here don't know much about you, can you give us kind of a quick rundown of your bio, where you're from, what brought you to this place that you are now? Who are you, Joshua Baer?
Sure. Well, anybody who has been around me for any short period of time knows my slogan, which is I help people quit their jobs and become entrepreneurs. And that's my email address is josh@quityourjob.com. It works. And I do that here at Capital Factory, which I just feel so privileged to be able to come here every day to get to go do. It's like Disney World for startups. There's just all kinds of amazing people and interesting things here every day that I get to meet and talk to and be part of. And Capital Factory is the center of gravity for entrepreneurs, and it's all about helping connect people to the other people they need. That's the most important part, the other people they need to help start their businesses and grow their companies. And so I started my first company in my dorm room in college in the first .com boom. I was studying computer science, and the internet was kind of the commercial internet was really just coming into being, where people were starting to like build websites where they put businesses on them and sold things and things like that. And so I helped there start one of the first hosted email service providers, or like a MailChimp or Constant Contact, and did a lot of work with email. If any of you notice inside of, for example, on your iPhone, if you're reading your mail in the mail client, almost most emails, if they're not total junk, at the bottom have like a unsubscribe link. But over the past couple of years, you might have seen at the top, it'll say, click here to unsubscribe. And it's like not part of the email, it's actually part of Apple. So I did that. And that was in 1998. It took like probably almost 20 years for that button to show up. And so I was involved in some standards development stuff around that. And so that ended up being my first business, which I started in my dorm room in college, and hired all my friends and fired all my friends, and then I bootstrapped that business. I had no idea that there was such a thing as raising money, or anybody would have given me any money, and grew it up till, in hindsight, right about the time a company here would probably go raise a Series A round of funding and scale it and grow it more, but then eventually sold it. And then started doing more angel investing and starting other companies and meeting other people that were starting other companies, like Brett Hurt, right as he was starting Bizarre Voice, and be able to get involved with some of them and help other people build great companies. And then at Jason Cohen, and helped a little bit at the beginning of WP Engine. And that kind of whole world is what kind of led to Capital Factory, which was at the time right when it's like everything was going on to the internet, and it was like startups were going on to the internet. Like now it's kind of obvious. You can go watch lots of great videos and find lists of investors and like lots of things about how to be a good entrepreneur, and that none of that stuff was on there yet. And so it was even more important to have a network and to plug into people. Not that it's not important now, but it was really, really critical. And Austin didn't really have that. And so as an angel investor, I realized that the best thing I could bring other than money, or the best way to be a great angel investor, was to bring something other than money. And that was other angel investors and network and people and talent and other ways to help. And that really was the beginning of Capital Factory, was getting together with 20 friends of mine who were all entrepreneurs like me that had built businesses, that were angel investors, who would think about something like this and be like, oh, that sounds super fun. Like, I want to go do that. And really it was all of us getting together to go work and help startups, which, like I said, that Mark was one of those first mentors. And when I talked to my first company, Skylist, actually Rick in the back, who happens to be here tonight, joined in the middle of that as the president of that company, and helped run that until I sold it too.
Awesome. So along the way, have you developed kind of a life philosophy in which you, and a way in which you live your life through these endeavors?
I'm sure there's a bunch of philosophies or things. I think.
Like, what have what's a philosophy that's come out of your work that you've been doing in Austin?
So and 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 I've had time to think about some of these things, so I don't know if this sounds too cheesy, but you know the pinned tweet on my profile is one of my life philosophies, which I think is really about it's a little bit about karma and about paying it forward, but it's also about just kind of like the place where I want to be, and it says my life strategy: 1, plant lots of seeds, because that's fun. 2, water everybody's, because that's just the kind of place that I want to be. And then 3, repeat. And that's just all I do. I just keep running around, starting things, and which I know you do a lot of too, Damon. That's something we have in common. And then try to be helpful to everybody that I can around me, because I know that if I'm just like going around doing everybody favors, in a good way, but like kind of like then everybody owes me a favor, and like that's where I want to be. Where like I feel like I've done a little bit more for everybody else, and then I know like anything I need is going to be easy. And when I want to do things, lots of people are going to want to help me, and that's my selfish reason for doing that. But that's worked really, really well.
My bio is cultivator, so I'm with you on that. I like cultivating people, organizations, companies. Particularly startups, so I'm right there with you. So is that a way that you would suggest that others live their lives, in the sense of should we all be trying to help each other, or what?
Yeah, I think that's a good start. I mean, I don't think that's hard to argue with. I mean, like everyone's got to figure out how to live their lives, right?
Yeah.
I'm not passing judgment on anybody else, but I think for me, a lot of these questions, the way I like to approach them is to start kind of think about like, well, what's the world I want to live in? You know, like what's the community I want to be part of? What's the place I want to be? And like, yeah, that's the kind of place I want to be. You know, like, and I think that's one of the things so great about Austin. I don't think we should take it for granted, because it's not we will lose it if we do. But when people come to Austin and why are so many people moving here, and why do people love it here and like it here, and why do they have such a great experience? And it's right now somewhat of a virtuous cycle. It feeds itself, because the people that do it, then it attracts more people like that. But people come here, and what I hear from them is they say, wow, you know, people are nicer here, and people are really collaborative. And in Silicon Valley, everybody tells me why something isn't going to work. And in Austin, people tell me 3 other people I should go talk to that can help me to go do what I want to go do. And part of that is this rising tide mentality that you and I have talked about for a long time, which Austin has had for a long time. And I mean, 5 years ago, I was thinking, how long can this go on? Like, how long can the tide keep rising, right? Doesn't it like hit some, how long can we be in the country? It's been like 10 years. But somehow we're still the fastest growing city in the country. Like, and it's still going. But those things, like, it's easier to be collaborative. It's easier for everyone to get along, for these things to happen when there's a rising tide, when everybody's growing, when everything is going well. And, you know, God forbid, I hope, you know, that doesn't turn around, but that would really be the test of Austin's culture, right? Would be when things aren't growing and rising the same way. But we've been so fortunate to enjoy that for a long time.
Yeah, it's like a self-fulfilling cycle, where when people see that that's the way that people behave, then other people feel compelled to behave that way to others. So it's great in that way. We should talk about your little device. What is this device you have clipped to you? Is everyone here being recorded right now? I'm being recorded on there, but are they being recorded by your little square?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's safe to assume most places you are today, you're being recorded. We've got 2 cameras right there. I'm sure there are some other security cameras around here.
We won't tell you where they are.
I can see them from my phone. I don't know where they are. But this is a camera. It's called a narrative clip. It's kind of old school, actually. Not a lot of people I know wear them, but it's still the best hardware. It's just the best form factor I can find, in that it's not really heavy and the battery lasts long enough to wear most of the day. And so it takes a picture every 30 seconds, and I have more than one of them. And I've been wearing it every day for almost 3 years now. And so and I don't really know anyone else that's done that. I know some other people decades ago have done other experiments like that, but it takes somewhere in the order of, you know, like 1 million pictures a month.
So what my question has to be, why? why do you want to wear this square? I mean, I know
Yeah.
you're kind of nerdy and everything, and that makes
Yeah,
sense.
I'm pretty up for anything, but it started as an experiment. It was it was an interesting idea, and I have patience. I'm willing to invest time and other things in these things. But when I first put it on, it started just with a premise. Part of my job is thinking about the future and thinking about startups and what's going to happen. And I think if you think about two trends that, as a technologist, are pretty obvious to me. One is Moore's Law, which basically says that everything's going to keep getting smaller and cheaper. So this camera now, which will last 8 hours or so, and costs maybe $200. So it means in 5 years, that's going to be a pin, that'll last for a week, right? And then another 5 years, it's just built into every light bulb. There's, video camera, probably, because it's going to cost a penny. And it won't just be a video camera. It's going to be an infrared sensor. It's going to be an audio sensor. It's going to be a temperature sensor. It's because there's going to be sensors everywhere, because that's what's going to happen. So one is Moore's Law, which just says it's going to get cheap enough to do all this and cheap enough to store all the video and the bandwidth and everything like that. Again, this just takes pictures. There's no audio or video because of the limitations of that right now. And then the second thing is artificial intelligence, which is what will make all of that useful. Because people ask me, do you go look at the pictures? I don't. I don't have time to go look at the pictures. I'm really busy. I don't even have 10 minutes to go look at all the pictures from today or from yesterday. It's not really that interesting. But if you imagine being able to feed all these pictures to some AI, it will be able to look at every single picture. And from that perspective, I don't really actually even think of them as photos. If I want to take a photo of something, I don't stand in front of it for 30 seconds or try to hold the camera up. I take my phone out and I take a picture, because that's what I want. If I want a photo and I want to look at it, I want to share it, I want it to be high quality, I want to see what it's going to be a picture of. This is data, and it's just data to feed to the AI. And if you think of the saying that a picture is 1,000 words, every picture this takes has so much data in it. And the most simplistic things are the obvious things of well, who am I looking at, and what, where am I, and what's the weather like, and what am I eating, or something like that. But it's capturing a lot more data than that. It's capturing a ton of data that probably seems totally irrelevant to us right now and hard to imagine how it could be useful or what we would do with it, just like it was probably really hard to imagine what we would do with the internet or what Google Maps might be like, or Snapchat or Twitter or things like that. But this is capturing how long your hair is and which shirt you're wearing and, a million crazy random things, right? And yet the AI will be able to process all of that information. And so, combining these two things, I cannot imagine a future. I just can't believe it, that 10 to 15 years from now, we are not recording everything all the time. It's just going to be too easy and too useful. And it's a boiling the frog kind of thing. It's not going to happen because somebody says, "Great, I'm going to go record my whole life." It's going to happen the way the Alexa comes into your living room, right? And it'll be like, "Look, it plays music," and we're like, "Oh, great!" It's going to be something like that, and we're going to be recording everything all the time. And like I said, it's also going to be incredibly useful. You're going to be at a disadvantage professionally and personally if you don't have a perfect memory, because everybody else is gonna. And so I think that is inevitable. The train has left the station. There's no chance that we are not recording everything all the time. I think when Peter Thiel has a favorite saying, "What do you think is true that nobody else thinks is true?" This is one of my most people I know don't think that's a fact, and I think that is just a fact, no question. And it is one of the most disruptive things, I think, coming to our society. We are not ready for it. This has been a big thought experiment because I get to talk to lots of people about it and see how they react and what they think and think about different situations that it's in. But it totally messes up our legal structures, our privacy structures, and to be honest, I actually think our very sense of self, because our whole society is, and I think even our personalities, I've learned, are somewhat, it's very forgiving that we don't have a perfect memory. And we kind of remember the things that we want to remember and choose to remember, and that not everybody can go check everything, but we're going to be able to go check everything. And so some other interesting things that have come out of it. One, when I first put it on, my assumption was that audio would be the most, and I played with some audio recorders at the beginning too, and I thought audio was the interesting thing, not pictures. And actually I thought pictures would be the sensitive thing, the things people would worry about, but it's the opposite. So pictures are actually no big deal. I can wear this all day long. I can walk into the bathroom. I can do it's never going to get a picture of anything, of me or of anybody else. There's no situation where I'm ever looking at anything that really it shouldn't see, except maybe my own phone. It gets lots of pictures of whatever's on my phone. Audio would be a huge deal. Audio, if I were carrying audio, and it would make a lot of people really uncomfortable right now if I was recording audio, especially in all the sensitive meetings that I'm in, talking with investors and startups and other things about confidential things. Nobody makes me take the camera off, but they would not be comfortable with me recording audio. But it's going to come in through a useful tool that records the meeting and keeps track of what everybody says and takes notes and does all these things that are useful. And then they're okay, yeah, actually maybe we can record the meeting, right? And then and then everybody gets a copy of it, and then it's just it's going to happen like that. So that was one really interesting learning, was just this the fact that actually that audio is what's so sensitive, not video or pictures. Another thing was interesting was seeing the change in people's reactions over the past 2 to 3 years. So at the very beginning, 2 or 3 years ago, 10 to 15% of people had a physical reaction to it when I told them about it, as in their body moved out of the way. Like when I told them what it is, they moved. They're like, oh, and they would it hurt. Like they almost unconsciously they would move out of the way, and that's much less likely. And everyone else just thought I was weird. Now, 20% of the people ask me where I bought it. They're like, oh, can I get one of those? I don't think they actually go buy them or anything, but that's the question. Is like, oh, where do you get that? Can I get one of those? It's so much more accepted now than it was then. Although I'll also mention that it's somewhat due to my environment too. Then I go some other place that's not Capital Factory or somewhere else, like my kid's school or something, and people think it's a lot more weird. But again, seeing how that changed. And then the last thing I'll mention is just time frames of it. So on the one hand, for me, the main reason for doing this is that I think we'll feed it to the AI, and I'll have my personal AI that's really smart, remembers everybody I've met with and everything I've done and everything like that. But and I talked about how looking at the old pictures really isn't very useful. To be honest, they're not very good pictures. This is a lot of pictures of the microphone, is what it's getting right now, right? With people behind it. Some of this is half a person, or it's angled wrong, or the light is bad. But so looking at the pictures from yesterday is not that interesting. Looking at the pictures from last year is not that interesting. Looking at the pictures from 5 years ago is not that interesting. Looking at the pictures from 10 years ago is not that interesting. Looking at the pictures from 20 years ago is kind of interesting. Looking at the pictures from 30 years ago, that's actually really interesting. Pick a day when I was 10 years old, any day you want. Show me all the crappiest pictures you want. That's really, really interesting. So I do think there's a time frame to it, it's not yesterday at that level, the looking back part. But there is this, our kids are going to have that. They are going to have, let me look at all the pictures, So, sorry, that was a really long answer.
Sure. So I guess let's switch gears a little bit to some entrepreneurial stuff, some startup stuff. I guess, what kinds of mistakes do you see founders making in building their businesses?
Man, no mistakes. Everybody's perfect. I'll tell you one mistake. Just even for example, in Narrative Clip, this is a business. It's still running. It's had some challenges, and it's kind of on life support, I think, right now. And I think part of it was just too early. They had a great vision because they started this probably 8 years ago or something. And I think they're still 5 years too early. So they were 15 years too early. And so having a good idea and being too early usually doesn't work. It's really, timing is actually one of the most important things. And so it's great, even for me, I know this is going to happen. It doesn't mean I know when it's going to happen. And I'm not making some big investment on it because of it. So that's one thing. I think I deal with a lot of technical people in particular who are entrepreneurs, but I think this goes both ways. And a lot of tech entrepreneurs think, well, they think the business is building the product, so they think like, oh, I know how to build it, so great, this business is going to be easy. I know how to go build. I'm just going to build it, and they don't realize like once you build it, that's just the beginning of building the business. Then you have to go build the whole business around it, and that's a whole different skill set and different set of things, and often a lot more unknown and hard. And so that's kind of a naive kind of thing. And it goes the other way too. A lot of business people who think like, oh, like I have this business plan, great, I just need somebody to build it, like, and that'll be easy. So everybody else's job is always easy.
I guess how do you make sure that you're not building something that no one wants?
Yeah, I have a good filter for that. I don't have to deal with that a lot because we're not, like, it's hard to even get our attention if you don't have any traction, meaning you don't have somebody engaged with you and using what you're doing. That's like one of just the first tests we do. Because, and so unless you've built like 10 companies before, like the first one we're going to be is like, well, is anybody using it? What are you doing? Who cares about it? What are you doing? And if you got nobody, then it's not that interesting because it's so easy to go build stuff people don't want, right? And honestly, it's so hard to know what people want. And so, so I do think that's something that can happen. But I think how do you make sure you're building something nobody wants is to try to have a customer first and talk to lots of customers and hopefully know something about the thing that you're going and doing.
What kind of traction do you expect a company to have these days who wants to be in the Capital Factory Accelerator, for example?
We work with a huge range of companies at different stages, and some that are really just getting started, and some that already have $1 million a year in revenue and a pretty good sized team and are off to the races because there's different ways that we can help them. And so I'd say the very minimum kind of bar we're looking for is we want a great team that's built something useful, that's got some traction, like that's got some people using it. And a big part of why they're here is to help, obviously, to accelerate that, to build their network, to help get their first customers, to hire their first employees, to find their first investors, to do all the things that make that move. And everyone's going to have different parts of that done or different amounts of that they've accomplished. And so, they might be at a different stage. But that's kind of the basics. And sometimes when we meet people that are too early, we might say, hey, we love you. We think you're awesome. And you look like someone who's going to be successful and really interesting. And what you're doing is really interesting. But you're just a little bit too early. Like, you haven't launched it yet. Or you don't have anybody using it yet. And depending on who you're talking to, sometimes people can feel really frustrated feeling like it's kind of a catch-22. They're like, hey, wait a minute. Like, I know what I want to go do, but I can't do it unless I get some money. And you're telling me I can't get any money unless I go do it first. Like, how am I supposed to do that? And unfortunately, I just think that's like just the beginnings of. That's why it's so hard to be an entrepreneur, right? You're not supposed to be able to do it. Like, it's really hard. That's why most people don't do it. Is you have to kind of be resourceful enough to figure out how to make something out of nothing, and how do you get something started when most people probably wouldn't be able to. And that starts obviously with the people, with the team. So how do you get people to be able to, get something started, to build something without first just getting a whole bunch of money?
So if you meet someone who's working alone, what do you tend to think, or what do you tell them? When they have a good idea, they're working alone. Is that something you usually think is a good idea? Or do you try to tell them you should take a different tact? And they might say, I don't have any money, so how do I get people to work with me if I don't have any money?
Yeah, so I thought you were heading one direction with that question, which is there's a kind of common meme around solo founders and like some investors not liking solo founders or wanting a team or things like that. And I don't get too hung up on that. I think it tends to be true in practice that solo founders tend to not have as strong teams. And so I do think it's less likely that we're funding solo founders because usually you end up, when things start going, you get a team. But as far as somebody that's in that position of like, well, hey, I have this idea, but I can't build it because I don't know how to build it, and I got to hire someone to go build it. Or, hey, I've got this product, but I can't really take it to market because I need this money to go hire a team to sell it or something like that. Your first sales job, your first big kind of thing to do is to convince somebody to join you. And, you know, at some level, if you can't convince somebody else to quit what they're doing, to put their job or their livelihood on the line, for them to commit to it as much as you are, then that's a bad sign. You know, like that's some of the feedback you're getting. It's not, you know, asking one person isn't like, okay, I couldn't get that one person, so I'm going to give up. But like that's one of the first tests is like, can you get other people as excited about it as you are? Can you get other people to make a commitment to it like you are? Or can you be really resourceful about doing it so that you find some other way to go get it done? Can you get it done cheaper? Can you fake it in a good way, not like in a deceptive way, but there's ways to fake it that allow you to get into business, to start making money, to validate assumption about what you're doing, to show progress or traction that, you know, aren't necessarily spending all the money and going and building it first. And so that's one of the first things. As you know, and you've been generous to help out with, you know, I teach at the University of Texas and work with a lot of student entrepreneurs. And one of the things that I always tell them is that it's hard to imagine a better time to start your company than when you're in college. And one of the reasons is because they don't have a lot of other commitments. They're not necessarily less likely to have families and other things that they need to go do and spend time on. But another big thing is I'm like, you're in like the best possible environment to find people to work with because everybody around you is unemployed and they're all like sorted and categorized and scored by what they're good at and what they know. And like, I need programmers. Great. They're in this building. Go talk to them over here. Right. And you can go find the best programmers and things like that. And so even if you're not a student, we have the University of Texas right here. And that's one place, right? And coming to somewhere like Capital Factory where you're going to bump into people and meet people. And there's people in all kinds of different circumstances. And some people have different levels of flexibility to be able to do those kinds of things. So I think there's lots of ways to do that. But you got to hustle. You got to like go work it and meet people and talk to people and make it happen.
So how do you...
Another quick example. So
Yeah.
when Skylist, my first company, was growing, look, staring at Rick, so tell Rick's story. But when Skylist, my first company, was growing, and I got it up to, I think it was probably about 25, 30 people, and a couple million in revenue. And I was, I wanted to bring in someone to help grow sales and run it and help run the organization. And Rick was looking to acquire a company, to buy a company, and so that's kind of how we got introduced, but I wasn't really looking to sell the company, so that wasn't really a fit. And then as he started learning more about it, we were talking about, hey, could he come help? And he's like, great, well, can you pay me to come help? And I said, well, I don't know. That's why I need you. So your first job is to come figure out if I can pay you and how much we can pay you. And we started, spending some time together. And I didn't hire him right away. He started coming and spending some time with me and looking at our books and putting together a plan. And we worked on that together. And then, I was not paying myself very much at the time. And I'm sure much less than he probably had ever been paid. And so we started off, and I think what we said is, great, well, we'll start off, and you can get paid the same amount as me. And as soon as you can figure out how to pay us both more, you can pay us both more. And we'll get raises together. And we were able to figure out how to go make that work. But, we had to go figure it out. And it wasn't a traditional kind of situation.
How do you know when you've met a great founder? Like, what do you look for? What traits do they have? Or what behaviors do you see where you're like, okay, this is going to be someone that I want to keep in touch with or follow?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot of different things. It is, we're such an early stage investor, and I'm often meeting student entrepreneurs and others. I mean, I think there's a certain part of what we're looking for is just like, you meet some people and you're like, oh my God, that person is unstoppable. Like, that person is going to be successful. Like, they are focused, they're diligent, they're smart, they're not an asshole, they're just like, those are the kind of people that are going to be successful. And that doesn't mean they're going to be successful at the thing they're doing now. They might still be young, they might be naive, but they have all these right traits that say they're going to figure it out and they're going to keep getting better and better, right? And that's at the core, I think, what I'm really looking for is like people that are great people, that are smart, that learn, that I can trust, that I believe in, right? There are definitely some traits, though, that are common in people that are more successful. Not that there aren't lots of exceptions and people that are successful lots of different ways. And I think the first one is really how they approach feedback and how they think about their idea and what they're working on. And I think some of the most successful people get much more obsessed about the problem than the solution. And when someone challenges their solution, instead of getting defensive about it and trying to just feel like their job is to defend their solution and explain why it's right, they get this insatiable curiosity thinking, wow, this person might have something I don't know or have a problem I don't know about. And so as opposed to like defend it, more validate it. Like, and the response is not, let me tell you why you're wrong and I'm right. It's actually usually, wait, help me understand your question better. Like, you know, like, really? Like, why do you think that would be? Like, tell me more, you know, like, and how could I test that, right? And it doesn't mean they're right, but like, you're not going to learn anything if you don't take it seriously. And anybody giving you feedback doesn't want to argue with you or have you just immediately tell you why they're wrong. And I also think along with that, a lot of entrepreneurs and founders who are pitching, particularly to investors, they think that's their job, is to convince them the person they're talking to that what they're doing is perfect or is the best thing ever or is right. And that's never going to be credible. Like, you're never going to convince them of that. So, I mean, rare exception, but generally that's not going to work and not going to make you look smart. And instead, actually, what I think most investors or people that are really trying to connect with you want to do is they want to actually connect with you. Every startup is messed up. Like, that's why it's a startup. Like, there are things that are wrong with it. There are challenges. There are, obstacles you're going to have to overcome. There are things you're worried about. That's natural. That's what they want to talk about, and get on the same page about. And if an investor asks you a really hard question and you don't know the answer, like, it's okay to be like, that's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that right now. I agree. We really have to figure that out. Do you know how to figure that out? Do you know who I should talk to? That's a way better answer than trying to convince them, oh, that's not really a problem, or like, well, something like that. But it's an attitude, right? It's like, how do you approach it? And people that are really good at that, they invite that feedback. They want it. They see it as an opportunity. Like, holy crap, you might know something wrong that I don't know. Like, let me figure that out. And so one of the first companies we have ever invested in from Capital Factory, a company called Sparefoot, that was one of the things that really stuck out to us right away from Chuck and Mario, the two founders, was just when the way that they responded to feedback. They were on top of their shit. They knew what they were talking about. They knew their game. But they took all the feedback really seriously and saw all of it as an opportunity to improve themselves.
Awesome. You mentioned investors, so I'll ask you, and you're known for sort of giving a lot of pitch advice and pitch practice. So how can an entrepreneur be successful in their pitch? Let's say, what were the elements of a pitch? An elevator pitch. There's different kinds of pitches, but what kind of general advice do you give?
There's a lot of different pitches, and there's like, I'm getting up and giving a pitch presentation. Like, I've got a half an hour, I've got 15 minutes, I've got 5 minutes. These days, I tend to focus more with companies and entrepreneurs on actually literally just the 1 to 2 sentences they first say. And that's honestly usually the hardest part.
If you can't explain it simply, then you don't understand it.
Yeah,
you can't
right.
Get people to remember it.
I've heard many different people attributed to this quote. I think Mark Twain said, sorry this letter is so long, I didn't have time to make it shorter. It's hard to write things succinctly and clearly. And as much as like your pitch or your description of your company it's all it is, it's marketing, it's a slogan, whatever it is, in a lot of other ways, it really is the soul or the essence of your company. And as that, like, if you looked at the arc of how that changes over time, that's really like your company changing. And when you nail it, when you figure it out, when you're like, oh, this is how we describe what we do, like it provides this clarity back to how you think about the business and even to how you communicate it inside your team and talk about it. And so on the one hand, like I said, it's just a slogan. But on the other hand, it really does tend to actually really matter, and it can mean a lot. And so one of the exercises that I do with every new accelerator company that comes in as part of their orientation or onboarding is we do a workshop where I get all the new companies together, and one at a time they get up and they have to explain their company in one sentence. And it's just a Mad Libs. They just have to fill in the blanks. And it's, we help blank customer benefit blank, like solve problem, that's another blank, so they can benefit. What do they get out of it? And we give them these really clear instructions, like you have to make this sentence, okay? We help blank do blank so they can blank. Fill in the blanks. And nobody does it the first time. They give me something else back, like this other long couple sentences, like different thing. And they're like, no, we really meant it. Actually go back and put it in, right? And then they try it again. And so then typically in that process, they'll fill it in, and then I help them rewrite it. And the first thing we do is take out all the big words and replace them with much, much simpler words, because most people's instinct is to try to use big words to make it sound important or sophisticated. And in your elevator pitch, big words are completely ignored. They just make people tune out. Like, people don't hear them, so there's really no point in saying them. But nobody in hearing your elevator pitch has long enough to think about why you exactly chose that particular word that's so important. It doesn't happen. And then also, most entrepreneurs' instincts is to describe in their first sentence, describe it in the most broad way possible that could apply to anything. Like, because they don't want to limit the scope. They don't want you to think they're small. So they're like, they describe it in some kind of like what ends up being really generic way that doesn't mean anything if you don't already know what you're trying to go say, right? And so then it doesn't really make sense anything either, right? And so the other thing I'm usually working with them is to actually do the opposite, to describe it in a really specific way. And they say, like, well, we help small businesses. And I'm like, great, what kinds of small businesses? What's the how do you know it's a small business? Is it people with less than a certain number of employees? Is it people now, do you work with any kind of small businesses? Are there certain industries that are more likely to be it? Oh yeah, well, it's mostly these, and these. Oh, great. And then one of the questions I ask the most in this process is, because they'll always give me 3 options, like, well, what are you good at? We're good at this, this, and this. And it's like, great, which one's the best? All right, what do you sell to? We sell to these, and these. Great, who do you sell to the most? And make them pick. Like, force them to say, okay, but you have to pick one. Pick one, what's most important? And get it down to like, great, so we help small businesses with less than 30, excuse me. We help small businesses with less than 30 employees in the service, who have people out in the field to... Okay, now I know who you're talking about. And actually, even better than it's now, what are 3 examples of that? So we help small businesses like coffee shops, bars, and blanks who have less than 30 employees. And okay, now I know exactly who you're talking about. I get it, right? Or even better examples. We help small businesses like, Austin, Java, and blah, who have less than 30 employees. Okay, now I've got a picture. And we help them to what? And again, they'll say all these generic things, right? And so the big concept behind this is, it's really hard to understand a generic description because it's generic. So when you paint a generic description, nobody pictures anything. So then they're just kind of like wondering what you're really talking about. But if you explain something really specific, it's really easy to picture exactly what you're talking about. And now that you've anchored me on something really specific, it's really easy to back away and think about that generically and broadly. And so rather than pigeonholing you, it like gives them an anchor point. If you say like, well, we do all this work and we do it for small businesses that have less than 30 employees, and maybe, because that's your sweet spot, that's what you really focus on. And then maybe someone says, well, wait a minute, I don't get it. Like, wouldn't that work for businesses with more than 30 employees too? We're like, well, actually, yes, it would. And we actually can sell to them too, but our focus is on these, right? Or, wow, our focus is on this industry, and it might, you might say, and they might say, wow, well, why is it that industry? Well, actually, we think it will work for this industry and this industry too, but we're starting in this industry now. And they'll make the connection. They can understand the bigger picture once you've described it really specifically, but not describing it really specifically makes it hard to understand it at all.
Kind of related, how do we balance the very next steps we need to take with the big vision as a founder? You want to, I've heard the term like niching down, like focusing on something very specific, like you're saying, but then if you don't have a big enough vision, maybe investors they think you're thinking too small. So how do you kind of walk that line between those two things, the big vision and the things that I need to do now to actually get something going?
Yeah, there's all kinds of different investors, right, and different people that think different ways, and so it's hard to. I wouldn't design it for the investors, but in general, I'm more of a fan.
Or inspiring people to join you.
Yeah, that's part of it too. But I'd say less than thinking about the big vision, it's solving a really interesting problem. And you can do that and start in a way where you don't know kind of how big it can go, but if you have to be working on something interesting or to begin with, and then having practical goals, being able to understand that there's milestones, and you have to balance that. You have to paint a big vision. You have to show people that this is something that could get really big, but at the same time, if you have no path to getting there, then it's not going to be believable or exciting either. And what's going to be compelling a lot of times is that what the next couple steps are. And so, I think having a pretty clear picture of what's your go-to-market, how do I get to my first step, but it really does depend what kinds of investors you're talking to and when you're talking to them. Angel investors are going to, they're very different beasts. Angel investors tend to be much more conservative. They're going to be much more like, okay, let me make sure that you're not going to run out of money, right? Whereas a professional investor like a venture capitalist is going to be a little bit more focused on the bigger vision because they need to see the ability to get these larger returns. And so at different stages also, you're going to have to kind of tailor your pitch in different ways. And sometimes you can skip a step, but it's hard to do that. And so that, then you might be able to not do it. But I think it's more about which investor you're talking to, and you're going to have to tune that out. Angel investors in Austin, really different than angel investors in Silicon Valley. And some entrepreneurs get frustrated when they come here to Austin and they pitch angel investors here, and then they go to the Valley and they find out that the pitch doesn't work. And they're like, oh, everybody in Austin was stupid. And it's like, no, everybody in Austin wasn't stupid. It's just different. And you got to tailor what you're doing to who you're talking to.
We should probably turn it over to the audience soon, but I want to ask you one more thing. What's one big thing that you're excited about for this year related to Capital Factory or anything else? What's one thing that's getting you super pumped this year?
Wow, there's a lot. This is going to be a good year. 2018 was a really great year, and I'm very excited about 2019. But I think the biggest thing I'm excited about now probably is the new the Army being here and all the defense innovation work that's going on. That's just been fascinating for me to be part of, to learn about. It wasn't something that we actually tried to do. We didn't really encourage them to come. I mean, once they asked to come, we encouraged them to come here, but we didn't invite them here. They just showed up. And so it's been really kind of like drinking from a fire hose, learning about all the problems that they have and ways that we can be part of that and ways startups can contribute to that. And that's been really interesting and really fun. And it's really just the beginning of that. I know that's going to continue to grow. And I think that's going to be really exciting and really fun.
I mean, just to give people a big picture of that, what's drawing them to Austin? What's drawing them to Capital Factory? What problem are they trying to solve by coming here and setting up shop?
Sure. So the U.S. government, particularly the Department of Defense and the military, the problems that they have actually are very similar to the problems that any big company has. And because if you think about it, in a lot of ways, startups really have no right to exist. They shouldn't exist. In pretty much every way, a big company or a big organization has like every advantage over a startup. So they have way more money. They have tons of expertise, like people that are smart, that are paid a lot of money, that have a lot of experience, that are supposedly experts at the things that they're doing. They have customers. So they like have existing customers they can sell stuff to, and more importantly, even almost they can learn from. They can like most startups are just making it up. They're trying to guess what everybody wants, but like they can just ask their customers what they want or observe what they do to learn what they really need. And there's a bunch of other ones too, but they have market position. They've all these reasons why really you should not be able to compete with them at all, right? And startups, they really, to be honest, they have one main advantage, or maybe a few advantages that let them do one thing. And that one thing that they can do is they can make decisions really fast. And that's something big companies and big organizations can't do. They can't make decisions fast. And we're talking multiple orders of magnitude. Like a startup can make 100 decisions in the time that it takes the Army to set up a meeting about planning to make a decision. And they've tried 100 different things. And they're still trying to figure out how to try the first thing. And so why can they do that? Well, one, there's nobody to ask. There's no committees. It's just like me and you. I'm like, hey, Damon, you want to do this? Yep, let's do it. Great, we just made a decision, right? So big groups can't do that. There's all these processes they have to go through, and people, and someone's on vacation, and like it takes 2 weeks to do that, to like have that conversation. So things slow down a lot. We can do that 5 times in this panel, right? Then the next thing is startups have nothing to lose. So like these big companies, the reason it takes so long to make a decision is because they're worried about losing their jobs, and they're worried about the fact that they're managing these big companies and billions of dollars and all these people and all these national security, whatever. So like they have to go really slowly, and they're careful, as opposed to these startups. Like, why can they just make a decision and try it? Because, I don't know, because they got nothing to lose, because the stakes are low, because if it doesn't work, they got nothing now, and if that doesn't work, they still got nothing. If it does work, they got something, right? So they can just try it. And, you know, kind of also building on that too, startups can change their mind. So we can decide to do this, and in 5 minutes, we can decide to do something else. And believe it or not, big organizations can't do that either. It's even harder to change their mind than they make up their mind, right? Once they've all committed to doing something and people have put all this political capital and will into it, now they can't deviate from the thing they did, even if they figure out that it's wrong, right? So those are like just structural problems with a large organization, and that is the advantage of the startup. And even as you think about as a startup, what you want to like lever is like, how do you keep yourself as nimble as possible, as long as possible, until you have product market fit and scale, because that is your advantage, is you can move super fast. So why does the Army come here? Why was Mercedes here? Why is big companies here? It's because if you're a big company, you know you have to innovate. You know you have to come up with new technologies and solutions and things like that. And you know that while you might come up with some of it yourself, that you're not going to come up with all of it yourself. That the only way to get at a lot of these interesting things is to work with startups, because of their ability to test things and try things and move really, really quickly. And yet it's really difficult for big organizations like the Army or the military to work with startups. The biggest problem to start off with is every startup they meet is about to die. Like, most startups have about 6 months of funding, maybe 12, and the startup thinks that's a long time. And the Army's like, we can't even sign a contract in that much time. Like, it'll take us more than that much time to get to know you and to sign a contract. It takes 18 to 24 months in general to get a contract with the government. So it's not going to happen. They can't work with any startups. In order to sell to the government, it usually requires having somebody on your team who used to work for the government. That's how it goes. Just because it's so complicated, you need somebody that knows people and knows how to make it happen and knows the right things. And that person's expensive, so startups usually can't afford them. They don't have them, and they couldn't afford them, right? Because the big defense contractors will go pay them hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then the last thing is that it usually requires, there's two together. It's the expertise of how to sell into it, and that usually the way you get that is from hiring somebody that used to work there. And then the other thing is, most of these big companies and organizations like the Army and others, they have like whole teams of people whose job is to keep them from ever working with a startup. It's like lawyers, procurement. They have rules like you have to have been in business for 5 years. You have to have at least this much insurance. These are rules that just say no startups, no startups, no startups, right? So, not to mention you have to know how to navigate their bureaucracy and things like that. So it's really difficult for them to do that, but they know they need to. And so the reason that the military and defense groups are coming here to Austin is to try to change their culture, to try to change the way they think about innovation and developing these types of things, to get their people embedded, interacting with the business community and the startup community, so that both some of that rubs off on how they think, and so that they can identify startups that they can work with directly to help them be more competitive in the global marketplace. And a lot of the innovations that we depend on actually came from the military, right? The internet came from DARPA. Everything that came from the space program, and cell phones and things like that. Palmer Luckey started Oculus Rift when he was working on VR solutions for the Army and trying to make portable VR for them. And there's lots of examples like that. But at the same time, the industry now is putting more and more money into R&D, and now much more than the government, when it used to be the other way around. And more, if the military wants to be a leader in AI, they're not going to go develop all that themselves. Like the cutting edge AI is getting developed by Microsoft and Google and Amazon and like those types of companies who are putting a lot more money into it, and also through startups. And so they need to tap into all these other types of innovation in order for them to be competitive.
Awesome. Well, we'll leave it there, and we'll turn it over to you guys for questions. But let's give Josh a round of applause. Thank him for his time. All right. So we have this fancy microphone. We'll pass this around. Does anybody have a question to kick this off? All right. We'll just pass this mic around.
So my question is related to adoption strategies, because it seems that it's pretty important. Like I see a lot of people that have great ideas, and if you know the right people, developing good tech is relatively simple. But how do you go from that to an adoption strategy that has that viral nature to it?
I think that probably depends a lot on what kind of things you're trying to build. That's going to look a lot different for something you sell to small businesses versus really big companies versus an app that consumers. So what do you have in mind?
Well, so when you're vetting an idea, do you think about the adoption strategy practically? Is that something that you consider, or do you think, okay, that's a viable idea, it's an interesting idea, let's try to develop something around that, and then we'll kind of go out with some, the typical kind of ways of trying to find adoption. But it seems to me that the companies that got crazy adoption, like Airbnb, hacked Craigslist, right? It's like a lot of the adoption strategies, or a lot of the big companies that have made it in a real way, there was something not necessarily nefarious or black hat, but certainly clever. And there was certainly a vulnerability in the market that they exploited to get instant attraction and gain that market space. And it's
yeah, so I wouldn't say most, but certainly there are lots of examples
Fair
of
enough.
that happening. There's lots of straightforward ways to go do it too. And so I think, again, the first thing's going to come down to what kind of business that you're building. And there are some businesses that it's just obvious, I wouldn't worry about it because it's obvious how you're going to go do it. And so an example is if you're selling something that other people have sold before, or there are other comparable things to look at where it's there are some businesses, there's all kinds of different risks to different businesses. And some businesses, the question is oh, can you even make that work? Can you build it? And sometimes with that, it's it's obvious. If you can actually do that, then oh, of course that's super valuable and people would want that because it's going to make all the cars use half as much gas. Okay, I don't have to worry about adoption if you come up with something that makes cars use half as much gas. I figure okay, that sounds really useful. The question is can you really do that, right? And can you do it in some scalable way? And then there's other times where you're trying to do a business that nobody's ever done before, and you're well, we're going to go get everyone to do this, and it's well, why am I going to believe anyone's going to do that? I've never seen anybody go do that before. It's usually really hard to get people to do something that they've never done before. In which case, you're probably going to have a much better answer for well, this is what we're going to go do. We have some clever strategy to get the initial users and things like that. But that said, like I said before about the meeting a lot of companies that I meet, every startup's messed up, right? Every startup's got problems. By definition, if you didn't have any problems, you wouldn't be a startup anymore. And so a lot of ways to think about a startup, and also tied to investment, is that when you start out with a blank slate, I've just got an idea, a startup has a whole bunch of different categories of risk. And in a lot of ways, each round of funding is often eliminating or de-risking one of those or more of those categories. And so one way to think about it might be that the first risk is usually team and execution risk. Like, can you build a team and can you execute? Like, can you get anything done? So building the MVP is a test of those things, right? And so if you can build an a good minimum viable product, a good something to start with, then that is a test that doesn't prove, forever, but at least proves like you got together the right team to go do it. And I can look at what you built and be like, oh, that doesn't suck. Like, you built something cool or something good, right? And then the next risk might be, the next risk might be market or customer risk. Like, well, does anybody want it? Not, which it could be just at all. Like, is it useful? Like, will people buy it? Now, I know you built it. Like, does anybody want it? And so the next step, you might then, after you built an MVP, maybe you go raise some angel money, a small amount of money from probably some people you already know, because chances are people who, if you've never done this before, who don't know you, aren't going to give you money to go figure out if something is going to work. But people that know you might. And then you're trying to figure out, like, okay, can I get, if it's a B2B product, for example, maybe like, 10 customers using it, ideally paying for it, but like just showing that it works and they'll actually want it and use it. If it's consumer, maybe it doesn't have to be a lot of people. And in fact, for me, I would much rather have a small number of people using it a lot than a lot of people using it a little, because I just want to see it at this stage, like, it's useful, and that's from being really useful to somebody is better than being kind of useful to everybody, because that doesn't get you very far. So that's the kind of customer risk. Then once you prove that, and you're like, look, I have 10 customers using it, and they've been using it every day, and they're really happy with it, and like they're using it a lot. So now you're going to probably go raise your seed round from probably some more professional investors. Maybe it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, or even $1 million or $2 million. And really now what you're trying to do is figure out how to sell it, how to scale it, how to do customer acquisition. And for different businesses, that might be, I need to go build a sales team that's doing out calls. It might be, I need to build an inbound marketing channel. It might mean that I need to go develop partnerships with other companies that are going to drive me, sell it for me, or drive me traffic. There's lots of different ways you might go do that. It might be, I figure out this hack for posting stuff on Craigslist and scraping things off there, and I can grow, or I figure out in Airbnb, I think one of their tricks was actually, in addition to maybe Craigslist, was in particular events. I think like the Democratic Convention was like a huge thing for them, where they did that. It was intentional. Like, they didn't just have a big convention. They were like, no, we're going to use this to acquire customers and to show that it works, and things like that, right? And just the way people use ACL here to launch things and test them out. And so, that's kind of that next phase, right? And you're eliminating this next risk, which is, can we acquire customers in a scalable way? And then your Series B round of funding, which often now be 5, 10, much bigger rounds of money, $10 million more, is scaling. Now it's like, hey, we figured out the sales channel, so now we're going to do that a lot. Like, great, we're going to go hire a lot of salespeople. We're going to put a lot of money into marketing. We're going to do whatever that is a lot, because now we're going to grow the business, right? So I don't know if that helps, but it's like, it's not always like just one part is like, depending on which business you are, there's going to be different answers. And then the other part is just what stage you're at, and then you still got to take it one step at a time. And the first step is validate, usually in that order I said. It doesn't have to be exactly, but it's usually about that order.
That was helpful. Thank you.
You got to pass it on to somebody. I don't think it's on, but try flipping the switch.
Is that good?
Yeah.
All right. Do you think it's possible to eliminate some of the customer risk very early on, like before you even have an MVP? And if you think it is, how much BS do you have to bring into that initial meeting? Yeah. Or how much honesty?
That's a great question. I mean, I think two immediate things come to mind. But when I talk to startups about fundraising and entrepreneurs about fundraising, I have a blog post about this that I wrote 2 years ago, but it's still, I think, totally accurate and relevant today, which was how to raise $500,000 in 2017 was the blog post. And it said 5 things. It says, and they were in order, very intentionally. It was 1, have a team to believe in. 2, go after at least $1 billion market. 3, have meaningful customer traction. 4, find what was the word I used? You need a lead, not a lead investor, but you need the first investor. And first investors are different than the follow-on investors. So finding that person to be social proof from a lead investor, so a first investor. And the last thing, it was an MVP. Now, ideally, you need all of those, but the reason they're in order is because if you have a very, very strong team, you don't need anything else. Like if you've taken 2 companies public before and you're going to start your next company, you probably don't need anything else. People will fund you just with that. If you have a pretty strong team and you can convince people you're going after a big enough market, like you can articulate the problem well enough, you can probably raise money on that. And the reason customer traction is before MVP is because you can have customer traction without an MVP. Now, it's really hard. That's why MVP is still on the list. You usually have to have an MVP. But you can have customer traction without an MVP. And one of the most obvious ways to do that is something like Kickstarter, which is a great example of having meaningful customer traction possibly without an MVP. Sometimes you have to build an MVP. But that's one great example of how you can get customer traction, show that people want it, actually collect money and pre-orders before you ever go build the thing. And because of that, that's enabled so many businesses to get built that never would have gotten built, that VCs and angel investors never would have funded. And particularly in these days, it's in the start of it, hardware things that were very hard to get funded then. And interestingly enough, if you're successful at that and you raise a big Kickstarter, it actually makes it much easier to go raise investor money because you can show people want it. Like, look, people really want this. Like, I got all these people to pay in advance. Like, that's a pretty good sign, So that's one great way to go do that. There are a lot of other, you just work backwards, right? The best thing to do is have a customer who paid, who's happy, who renewed. Okay, boom. Like, now that's a good customer, okay? Next is one who hasn't renewed yet. Next is someone who's paid, but they're not using it yet. But they paid, they really want it, Maybe the next one is they're using it, but they haven't paid yet, Maybe the next one is they've signed a contract to use it, but they haven't started or paid yet. And they're going to pay as soon as you finish it, And that's, if you had a bunch of those, that's still pretty good, The next one might be, well, I got a whole bunch of people that have letters of intent, which don't really mean anything, but it means they extended some effort. Like, look, I can show you people are interested. The next one is I've got these 3 email threads. Look at them. They say they want it. They're really interested, right? Like, I'm at least showing those to investors. Like, here's my email with Walmart. Like, they're pretty excited about it. I mean, it's not as good as them paying and renewing, but you're kind of working backwards from there, and you got to tell a story. You got to paint a vision for that.
Yeah, I'm curious about burnout and kind of those emotional lows. Obviously, Capital Factor, you have all sorts of entrepreneurs there. How often do you see that? What sort of I don't want to say necessarily safety net, but like what sort of structures there to kind of help those folks out and maybe what's some horror stories you've seen, or how much of that dramatically impacts the businesses? Do you see people just collapse and like fall out the bottom, or what goes on with that?
Yeah, so look, entrepreneurship is really difficult and really an emotional roller coaster, and mental health is obviously a huge issue, in our country, in our world, and certainly for entrepreneurs. And to be honest, I think it's really difficult even to answer your question because I think we probably don't see most of it. Because I think what happens in those cases that you're talking about is those people, unfortunately, probably they just stop showing up. They didn't win. Things aren't going well. A lot of people's reaction is they're embarrassed. They always walking around, everybody's celebrating, talking about all these great things they did. They're like, great, how are you doing? And they're like, oh, well, actually, my startup's dying right now. It kind of sucks, right? That's not super fun. And when people are depressed, they tend to go, be by themselves. And so one, I bet it's a lot more than we see. I bet, unfortunately, we don't see all of it. And it's something that's actually touched us. I don't know all the specific circumstances of this person and or that it was directly this scenario you described, but we had a member who had not been a member very long. We didn't know very well. Who a few years ago ended up having a serious mental breakdown, and there was a basically killed themselves and somebody else like out in the lobby out there. And like that was, you know, a big wake up call to, wow, this is real and it affects everybody's lives. And I'm, you know, unfortunately we don't have many stories like that, but that was like, that's, if you ever asked me about the worst day at Capital Factory, like I know which day was the worst day at Capital Factory. So it's real, and certainly other people like Brad Feld from Techstars and others have talked about founder depression and other things quite a bit. We actually, so as far as what you can do about it, the first thing is actually this is one of the many reasons why we actually really do encourage you to have a co-founder, just separate from the solo founder thing we were talking about before, and that's because this is really hard. And it really, there's a difference between having an employee and a co-founder and a partner and someone who's like in it with you and somebody who has just as much skin in the game and somebody who you can be honest with and you can be vulnerable to and somebody who, when you're feeling bad, hopefully they're feeling good and they can lift you up. And, you know, like, and when they're feeling bad, you can lift them up because you're both going to have those kinds of days. And that's one thing that that's one big reason for having a co-founder, I think, is because it's a really hard emotional journey, and it helps to have a partner in it, or at least one. I wish I could say this was like super intentional. It was very opportunistic, but at Capital Factory, we actually have one of the mentors on staff who is a trained counselor, a psychiatrist, and she comes in and does office hours. And she actually does it right out in the open in the middle with everybody else doing office hours. But people aren't talking to her about their about startup problems. Like there's founders going and talking to them about the challenges that they're facing. And I'm super glad that she's here. And her office hours are booked every single time. Like she's full. So when you say what things are we doing, I don't think whatever the answer is, not enough. Like we're not doing much at all. Like I think we try to be thoughtful about it. But those are my advice would be is like one, that's why you don't want to be just doing it by yourself, and two, that's why it's great that we have that resource here. As far as how I deal with it, I'm a professional investor, right? This is my job. I invest in more than one company every week. Like I'm in hundreds of companies. My heart, I love everyone, but my heart is not broken and my world is not crushed when one of them doesn't work. Like I know that's going to happen. I've had it happen lots of times. If your startup fails, it is much worse for you than for me. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs get really intimidated about that. They feel really bad about it. They'll often apologize to me as an investor and feel like they did something wrong. They might not want to see me. And so I've got a pretty standard response when somebody sends me that email that says, hey, and I get them probably now these days, once a month or so at least, that's, hey, I'm really sorry to say that you invested in my company and I'm shutting the company down and I'm not going to be able to give you your money back. And I hope someday to make it up to you, but it's not going to work out. And that's a really hard email to go write. And if I liked the person, if they weren't an idiot about how they did it, then in the end, this is one of the great things about America. That's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, my attitude is like, well, I just paid for them to learn all these lessons. Like, I hope they let me invest in the next thing they go do because hopefully they've learned something and they're going to, if they're a good person, like I know not everything works. Not everything I do works. Like sometimes it's not all about you. And so, in fact, and I probably gain more respect for entrepreneurs and in seeing how they fail than in seeing how they succeed. And there's lots of people who fail with such grace and such excellence that I'm like, oh my God, I'm so into whatever if that's how they failed, like I'm so into whatever they go do next. And so that's usually if I like you, the response from me is like, hey, I'm a professional investor. I knew that risk when I took it. My only ask of you is to give me, to make sure to give me the opportunity to invest in whatever the next thing you go do is. And that's the message, that I want them to get out of it. And I think they, I don't think that's the answer they get from everybody. But I think they really appreciate that.
So you're pretty into technology, and at the end there, you, in my opinion, address sort of the core problem that these large organizations have with their decision making. It almost sounds like, it's like the Army came to you and they're talking about their issues, and you realize, okay, their core problem is ultimately structural. What place do you feel like technology has in addressing some of those structural problems of large organizations like the Army, and maybe more broadly, like I'd say the government in general? Because I feel like that causes a lot of societal issues in the world. And I don't know if there is some way in which we can use technology in order to help address it. I feel like that could have a huge impact for the entire world, really.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's lots of ways that technology is going to continue to help the government, the military, our society, and be better and help us communicate better and organize better and be more efficient and have more information is a big part of making better decisions, right? And being able to do them more quickly. One of the challenges is just not having the information you need and having time to collect those. Being able to collaborate in different ways, or remotely, or asynchronously, right, are things that'll make that easier. But honestly, when you ask that question, I don't think a lot about technology. I think in the end, and this is something, as much as I'm totally a technologist and always try to think of a technical way to automate everything or technical solutions to everything, in business and in life, most problems are people problems. And and I think most of those problems are people problems. And it's really, it's culture, and it's getting people being comfortable being uncomfortable, and learning about how to take risks and things like that. And that's not, to me, not really a technology problem. It's a people problem. And what's so hard is, like, it's risk, right? It's like, it's not a calculated answer. Like, it is risky. It might not work, and that's the challenge. Is you gotta, but again, that's why there's a place for entrepreneurs, is because they can go take those risks. But I don't know. I like I said, I see it bringing more information. I think it, it hopefully can put more kind of power to the end nodes, right? Like let people more closer to the problem make decisions. But in the end, I think it's more structural, more people.
Is it working? Do you feel like maybe AI potentially might take the human element out at some point, or do you feel like that'll never really, really gain a lot of ground, because at the end of the day, people like to be in control?
So I'm just at the end right now of a great book called Homo Deus. It's the sequel to Sapiens by Yuval Hornvoth. Am I saying that right? Anybody around? I don't know. Yuval is his first name. Sapiens is a great book, and I'm also really enjoyed Homo Deus. Although Sapiens was like a little bit more of like a history lesson, which was fascinating and interesting to me. And Homo Deus, for me in my role, is a little bit more of like, yeah, I know that. Like, exactly, right. Like, I'm like, yeah, this is like the way it's very much articulating stuff I think I'm living. But one of the things that he talks about there, in particular at the end, I'm towards the end right now, is about the rise of AI and how that's going to affect our lives. And actually really even coming down to the fact that, like, he's like, really his base argument is people are algorithms, like we're biological algorithms, and over time we're learning how to create digital algorithms that can replicate those same things. And he's kind of really eating at actually the very sense of self, of identity, and saying, look, like, we think we know what we want, but what happens when the computer can tell you what you want better than you can tell you what you want? And like, we kind of already have that with driving directions, and talks about the transition from, what did he call it? From maybe trust to sovereignty. And basically, it's like we trust Google Maps or Waze, and we're looking to it for advice, but then sovereignty kind of becomes like, I think I should go to the right, but it says I should go to the left. I think I'm going to go to the left. Like, you're actually like giving up to it at some level. And we're already doing that with AI and with things in the real world. And in the future, that will be questions about, like, who should I marry, or who should I date, and which job should I take, and what movies should I watch? We do that today, right? And we're letting AI and computers make decisions for us. And then at the same time, another great thing would be health. Actually, the example that Yuval gives in the book is Angelina Jolie getting a double mastectomy to protect herself against breast cancer because she has the very dangerous gene that puts her at high risk, and her mother and grandmother, both were affected by it. So she knew she was at super high risk, and that was AI and computers and algorithms causing her to take this action proactively to protect herself. And more, we're going to have that. We're going to have computers telling us what we should go do. And but then I thought, like, it's kind of interesting because I think there's always an arms race, right? Like, on the one hand, like, there'll be computers telling us what we should go do and what we should pay attention to or not, and then there'll be a whole set of other computers trying to trick those computers into telling us to go do something else, because that's just the world we live in, and and I don't know how that kind of like solves itself out. So yeah, with the Army, the big question is with the U.S. Army, there's a moral imperative that the computer can't pull the trigger, and other militaries are not bound by that moral imperative. And that's going to be a test of that big question for us. One of the ones that's going to come soon is because it's hard to maintain that moral imperative when the others don't. And so right now, a person always makes a decision to kill somebody, is my understanding, in the U.S. military. There's a company here in Austin called Tracking Point, which basically was run out of business because they had the technology to go create machine guns that, using like facial recognition and far range cameras, could basically sit on the wall and protect the wall. And the U.S. government's not allowed to use it, and they're not allowed to sell it to anybody else. So, that kind of killed them. And I'm not saying they should be able to do it. I'm just saying this is like a big existential question coming at the military. And I imagine, I must believe that we are ready to go do that, because we have to be ready to go do it, even if we're not allowed to go do it. I'm sure they've got a plan for when the other people go do it to be able to defend against it. And so that's an example. I think that'll actually be one of the first big ones that come. But another great example is, like the elections that just happened. Like, I consider myself pretty, educated in the news, in current affairs, in what's happening in politics. I know a lot of the people that are running for office personally in local elections and things like that. And I get to the ballot box and I've got 55 decisions to make, and I know like 5 of them. It's just really hard to be educated about who to vote for. And are we going to get to a point where the algorithm tells you who you want to vote for? And would a lot of people take that? Probably. So I don't know. I think these are really great questions, but I think we'll see it more and more involved. But I also think it's not just one AI. It's an arms race between a bunch of AIs, and maybe that's what keeps us honest. It's like they're all going against each other. Other questions?
I mean, I can keep going.
All right. Well, first, thanks for what you guys are doing tonight. I think everybody here is getting something from being here. But to derail that conversation a little bit and come back to the startup, what would you say generally the most successful tactic you've had for gaining traction has been across maybe your first business or even up into the businesses that you're running now? And when I say traction, I mean starting from the first customer, that first group of customers that isn't family, friends, things like that. And when would you say the point is to pivot and say, okay, I've been doing these techniques, I've been going to these events and doing this type of marketing or outreach, things like that. It's not working. When do you start to look for new venues? And how do you know to continue doing what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's the $1 million question. I think if there was an easy answer to that, or if I could articulate that really well, I should go write a book, and that would be great for lots of people, because that's a great, really hard question. It's really hard to know when to quit or when to move on, right? When you hear all these stories about people who didn't quit, and they stuck with it, and they were persistent, they were successful, right? And then you don't want to be the idiot that does that and never gets there, right? So I think that's a really hard question. I think that for me, that's why I'm a bootstrapper. And that's how I think of myself. Even though I'm an investor in lots of companies, everybody who knows me, and I think I'm a bootstrapper. And Capital Factory was bootstrapped. So how did we start Capital Factory? I went to 20 of my friends and I asked them all to chip in $5,000. We had $100,000. I put up a blog post. We put out the app. I created a form where people could apply. Well, I was Capital Factory. There was no, I didn't have anybody helping. I actually had a couple friends helping me, but nobody hired or something like that. We had $100,000. We picked 5 companies. We gave them each $20,000. We realized we forgot to put money in for pizza. Had to go find some way to buy pizza every week. And that was the first year of Capital Factory. It was $100,000, which is actually no money at all. That's nothing. And it was each of us chipping in $5,000. And we did it for 3 years on $100,000 a year. It was pretty good dollar for dollar too. We just got it back this year with Spare Foot. I don't know. I'm actually not sure. I don't remember you were in that chain, but yeah, no, it was, but it actually was a good investment, but it was a small dollar amount, right? And we did that for 3 years, and for the first at least 2, I think for at least 2 of those years, I had sold my other company. No, my last company, and I was working on a new startup. I was working on Other Inbox, my last company, when I started Capital Factory. So I actually had another startup that I was running, and so first of all, I didn't just go raise a bunch of money and go start doing it. I tested it, and we basically, in hindsight, we didn't call it a beta test, but compared to now, we beta tested Capital Factory for 3 years, and we didn't I didn't rent any. I didn't sign a lease. We didn't open any space. I didn't, my legal bills were super small. I didn't hire anybody. I used extra space in my office from my other company. We used extra space in my friend's office. I got all my friends to chip in a small amount of money each. And we did it for 5 years. We had 15 companies go do. We had 5 companies per year, which now to us sounds like a very small number. And we kind of got something working. And then we opened up the space. And then we, in the beginning of the space, started with just 1 floor, right? It was much simpler, and we kind of filled that up. And as we got, then it was you kind of got traction, and you go to the next step. And so, that's not the only way to go do it. But I'm just, I'm saying for me, that's how I deal with that problem. Is we kind of test stuff. We throw stuff out there. We see what sticks, and then we build on it. And we make really inexpensive, fast tests. So another example. 2 days ago, we had our first webinar, as if they were just invented or something. But I don't know, we do everything in person for the most part. And one of the most core programs at Capital Factory that I've done the longest is for probably close to 10 years. I've done the intro to the Austin startup scene that I think, I don't know if maybe I did the first one, Damon did the second one. We've been doing it forever, and I've done more of them since then. And then we call it, and then it's an AMA, an Ask Me Anything session, kind of like this, and we do that once a month now, and now there's other AMAs. There's an intro to fundraising, an intro to being a mentor, an intro to investing, and so we do that every week. Every week we do it, and it's on the Tuesday every week, and we usually get 40 or 50 people to show up every week. It's awesome, 40, 50 new people that we meet. And so it's a great program, very successful for us. We opened up our place in Dallas. We go on the road show. We do AMAs up there, same kind of thing. So this year, as we're trying to go all over Texas and realizing that we're trying to reach companies that might be not in the city that we're in when we're doing it, or maybe not, maybe they just live in Dripping Springs or something, and they don't want to drive all the way here downtown. Maybe they have family or job requirements. They can't get here at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to come to the thing. And some of this is also about scale. If we had done this a few years ago, maybe it wouldn't have worked. But we felt like we're at a size and a scale when we can go do it. So we decided to go do an a webinar version, and see how many people would sign up and whether they'd do it. And so unfortunately, we did it the first week of the year. And so with the holidays and everything else, everything was behind. And we didn't get to announce it before the holidays. So we had it on Tuesday, and we actually announced it on Friday, like 4 days before, which is not a lot of time to promote it or to get things to show up. But we were doing it the first time. We weren't too worried. If 10 people showed up, I would have been fine with it or whatever. But we did it anyway, and we just was like, you know what, we're going to do it once and see how it goes, and then look at the feedback we get and move on. And then in this case, we actually got great feedback. Like, got more people, 3 times as many people signed up for the webinar as come in person, and more people actually attended than come in person. And so we're like, okay, great, that worked. We'll do it again. You know, we'll try another one. But it was, you know, we test it, we try it. The first bus trip that we did, we're going to bus trip to Dallas. We're going on Tuesday. You know, it was just same kind of thing. We just did the cheapest, simplest bus trip we could do. And then, you know, saw what worked and built on it.
Working? Cool. So as an investor, what would you personally, just looking for your opinion, want to see from an industrial hardware company trying to raise a seed round right now to finalize the development of the actual final version of the hardware? What would you,
What's industrial hardware?
It's high-speed industrial 3D printers.
So first of all, I'll just say that's not our sweet spot. So I'll give you my answer, but it's not like I'm doing a lot of those investments, and so that doesn't mean like my answer's the answer everybody would give or somebody who's your sweet spot of an investor would give. We do invest in lots of hardware products, but probably not industrial ones, or things that require a lot of capital infrastructure up front. And so I think in the end, and most of the things we're investing in, we're not investing for them to get to building the first product, you know, for those same reasons. Like, you know, we're investing, they've already got some first thing. And so again, kind of work, but people are going to understand with hardware, with some of those things, like, hey, this doesn't get to market without getting funded first, those other pieces. And healthcare often can be a similar example where it's just a different process. It takes more time. Just having a trial going with 2 or 3 hospitals is like a really big deal and is really good. And you know, like that's as, you know, comparably to getting somebody else to pay. And so it kind of gets back to the traction question that we were asking before. You just kind of work backwards, right? And it's like, well, how much traction can you show? Like, you can't actually be selling them yet, but how do you know people want them? I mean, I would say pre-orders is a really great start, like having some expectation of the ability to sell it. You know, successful trials. A lot of it gets back to what it does. I know a good amount about 3D printing, but as a different example, you know, if something clearly makes something an existing situation much more, an order of magnitude more efficient, if you can make it 10 times cheaper or 10 times faster, as an example, like, you got a pretty clear value prop, you know? And so now it's like, just validate, does it work? And you've got probably a strong argument for we should go build it, right? And try to go sell the first ones. But it's going to be some kind of combination of those things. Either the value's got to be obvious that, of course, if you build that, people will buy it. Like, we have a company here called GenXCom. It's some UT research that's being commercialized. And they can take any two-way radio, whether it's over the wire or wireless, and double the speed of it. It's pretty compelling. Like, everybody needs more bandwidth. Being able to make everything twice as fast is pretty good. I buy it. Like, if they can make that work, like, I think people will want it, you know, like, it's a long tail kind of thing. Now, they ended up, their lead investor is Intel Capital, if I'm remembering correctly. Do you remember, JD? Is that Intel? Yeah. And so, you know, it's also, you know, choosing your investor, you know, and so they were probably able to get some seed funding, or, you know, not even seed funding, but initial funding, probably through some grants and research, because it came out of UT. The professor that did it spits out like 3 really interesting companies every year, so probably could raise a little bit more money just based on a really strong team and his track record to get maybe a little bit more of it built. But then getting in a strategic investor like Intel, who could, for them putting up they can put up a lot of money compared to many other investors. To them, they write big checks, and they make sense because they kind of get that space and what they're doing, and they could be a strategic partner, and that was pretty key for them, and then as for us, or, to me personally, again, because that's not my sweet spot, because I can't give them all the money they need, because I'm not an expert at taking hardware to market. We did invest in that, but we invested as a small little investor alongside, Intel's big check.
Hello. Okay. So, what's the litmus test for figuring out at what point do you stop self-funding and you go to raise capital? And then the second question is, if you go to an investor, how do you know that you got the best deal? Is the answer to shop around, or is the answer how do you know that you gave up maybe too much of your idea too little money, too early on? That's my question.
Yeah, so the first thing is you have to understand what kind of business you are, and not every business is the same. And the most common example that we're going to talk about are software tech businesses, apps and SaaS businesses and things like that. And there's a lot of those, and those are pretty standardized. So we can talk about them really generically, and I can give you really generally good rule of thumb answers to those kinds of things. But then other kinds of businesses will have lots of different answers. There are lots of businesses that don't make any sense to ever raise money for. That doesn't make them a bad business. That's just not the kind of business they are. And the way you raise money for a real estate business or a real estate project looks really different than how you raise money for a software business, which kind of looks different often than a hardware business, or these days than an ICO or a blockchain business, right? So there's a lot of different businesses. But if we want to put ourselves in the world of SaaS software businesses and apps and things like that are probably the most common and really well defined, and assume that you are building a business that's big enough to attract venture capital and investment, that can be a big enough business to raise money for it all, then I would say that it obviously depends on your personal situation, because most people just raise money because they have to. And that's the other thing about a lot of these questions. A lot of these questions position them as if you have choices, as if there's a real world of possibilities. And actually, the biggest thing you can do for yourself is just try to get any choices, because most people that I see don't have any choices. They're not having these big debates of which investor should I pick, or is my valuation right, because they only have one offer if they've got anything. In which case, you don't get to pick anything, and you don't get to make any decisions, right? Or things like that. But so it's great to have these choices and these options. But if you're in a software company that's the kind of company that could go raise money, and you're trying to figure out, should I raise money or not, and you have the choice because you don't have to raise money right now because you can have some other way of supporting yourself or of going forward, then the best time to raise money, these are going to sound cliche, but they're very true. First of all, the best time to raise money is when you don't need it. It's counterintuitive, but if you're about to run out of money, nobody wants to give you money because you look like you're about to die. So they want to invest in a strong business that's actually using the money for growth, not to keep from dying. Not that it doesn't happen the other way. I'm just saying, that's the best thing to invest in. That's what investors actually get really excited about. So the best time to raise money is when it's literally a black box that's just put money in this side and more money comes out the other side. You've gotten to that growth stage, right? And you figured out how to sell it, and you know what your demand, and and so you're raising money because you just have an opportunity cost. You're hey, if I let it keep going, it's going to grow this fast. But I know that if I pump more money in here, if I spend more money on search ads, if I spend more money on social, if I put on more of these events, if I hire this many more salespeople, I know it's going to make this much more money, and I'm going to grow that much faster. that's the best time to raise money. And if you can make that compelling argument, you will have lots of options for how to go raise money, right? Like that's so if you can get all the way to there, you would do that. So a great example I think that I like to talk about for this that I learned a lot from was WP Engine, which is one of the most successful companies I've ever been involved in. And I was so fortunate to meet Jason Cohen as he was getting ready to start his next company. And we partnered up to go start companies together. And then he came up with WP Engine, and he did most of the work, and I got to help out a little bit. But I got to be there through all the very beginning stages of it and was on the board of that company until just about a year ago. And with WP Engine's a WordPress hosting service, a managed hosting service, and so they basically make WordPress into SaaS, so that anybody wants to run a WordPress site, but a business one, a good one that's really fast and secure, and you can customize and do things with. You don't have to go set up a server or install WordPress or manage security or keep it running or anything like that. They do all that. You just do the WordPress part. And at the time that he started that, WordPress was very popular. It was about 10% of all the websites on the internet at the time. And I remember thinking that was enormous. I was like, oh my God, how could you be 10% of the whole internet? And it was growing. And so it was a big market that was growing. There were no good places to host it. You could go run it. Everybody that was doing anything serious ran it themselves because there was no high quality place to go put it. And I was not using WordPress at the time, and the reason I wasn't is because I couldn't find any good place to go host it. And so I was using, I think, TypePad or something else at the time. And so when Jason told me about it, it definitely resonated with me too. And then, so Jason started building this business, and a big part of the business was having great customer service, because WordPress was really kind of voodoo. And like, it's easy if you're getting started with WordPress to set something up and then screw it up and not know how to fix it or not know what's wrong with it, right? And one of the great things about WP Engine was that Jason was super smart and helpful, and he built a support staff and a culture that was just a very can-do, like, we'll kind of, not only are we going to like run the site for you, but you can kind of ask us questions about WordPress, and we're the WordPress experts. We'll help you figure it out too. And figured out how to do that in a way that was still efficient and allowed them to run a good business. But it did mean that they needed to have really high-quality customer service reps. And it took about 3 months once we started to get up and going, and it wasn't just Jason doing all of it. We realized it took about 3 months to train customer service reps. Well, the business started doing really well, and it started growing pretty quickly. And we were having no problem getting customers to sign up. But Jason was really insistent on having this very high level of customer service, and he realized that in order to just meet the demand of the customers that were already signing up, we had to start hiring more customer service people for the projected demand we knew we were going to need. And if we wanted to maintain the same level of customer service and not raise money, we would need to actually turn away customers. That was a really good time to raise money. And it was really easy, because we said, hey, we have all these customers signing up, and they're really happy. And we're about to tell them that they can't sign up, because so we've got the money coming in. We just need to hire the people to service the stuff we're already selling to let us grow faster, right? Super easy to raise money. Right time to go raise money. I very rarely see a situation that perfect. But that was a great one. So great, just side point about that. So WordPress, not WP Engine, but WordPress was powering 10% of the internet at that time of all the websites. Today, the latest stat I heard, I believe WordPress powers 30% of all the websites on the internet. That's a big number. That was about 7 years ago. Imagine, and this is another great lesson I've learned about particularly from WP Engine, also from my first business with Rick in email, because email was also email marketing was an incredible boom and growth during the time that we were doing it. Co-working, another business that we're in, that's been an incredible growth and boom since we started it. So lessons about being in a growing market and how powerful that is. Life's Austin in a rising tide. Life's a lot easier in a growing market. It's hard to sell to newspapers. We got one of those, Own Local. They're making it work, but it's hard. And so, great lesson, because WP Engine is it is an amazing company. Jason is one of the best entrepreneur I've ever worked with. Heather Bruner, who's now the CEO, is the best CEO I've ever worked with. It is a great company culture. They do so many things right, but they also have this incredible wind at their back and benefit of being in this enormous market that has been growing at an just unbelievable rate, so that there's just this unending supply of customers and demand for what they go do. So then they provide a really high quality, great service in that market, and they're just killing it. And that was a great lesson for me. And so as you think about what things you can do, like, you get to choose where you start and what market you're in, and you can make your life a lot easier by being in something that's a really interesting, high growth market.
A moment ago, you mentioned a list of key aspects for a startup. I want to talk about the core team. How would you characterize the core team in that piece in its relationship to the other pieces that are core to a good startup? Is it a multiplier, or is it just an interdependent piece? And then because of that, how much do you kind of matchmake from your own network to make sure that core teams happen on the companies you're working with? And would you consider yourself typical in that nature?
I mean, the team's the most important thing. But it's rarely that I ever see a team that's, assembled like someone paints a painting, picking exactly the right shades and the right brushes and putting everything together the right way, because things just usually don't happen that way. Brett Hurt, I mentioned before, he's a good friend. He's this serial entrepreneur. He's the founder of Bizarre Voice, a company that went public here in Austin. He's the founder of Data.World, another really exciting company right now. He's started other companies before that. He has a huge network of people that have worked for him before. It's a great, huge advantage when you're starting a company, having people that that you've worked with before, that know you, that trust you, having a network, and a great track record. He's one of those people. Like, all he has to do is say he's starting a company. He doesn't need to check any of the other boxes. He'll instantly be funded. And so because of that, when he went to start Data.World, he was able to assemble just an incredible starting team of co-founders who really filled every, there's like a great COO and a great CTO and a great VP of engineering, and then him, and then like a, just all-star cast, right? Super rare. Nothing starts that way. Everything starts with one or two people, and they organically, fill in gaps and holes and add people, and you kind of opportunistically and organically end up growing is what usually happens. And so I feel like it's not like the right answer to what you're saying. I should be like, oh yes, we're super careful about it, but no, that almost never happens that way. It's almost always totally organic, and I think doing anything to be intentional about it is actually a big step forward over what usually ends up happening. And that's part of the core of the diversity problem. Is that, I'm going through this right now. If you saw the blog post this week we put out about, a bunch of promotions in our team, and Georgia, my COO, is moving on. And she's been here for 4 years, and she's like one of my best friends and my closest partners. And I've been so proud of the fact that one of the things is that I've got a super senior female on my team who's like my, closest partner running this place. And on the one hand, there's like a lot of just obvious internal, not external, but our own pressure to go hire another female for that role, right? Or in a similar way. And diversity is really important to everything about our culture and things that we do. And it's something we spend a lot of time on and think a lot about. And yet now, I'm in a position where I need to hire someone for my executive team. And we're running 1,000,000 miles an hour. We got a ton of stuff to go do, and it's really important. And this person has to work really closely with me, and I have to trust them a really lot. And it's really hard to do that with somebody I don't already know. you know, like that I haven't, like your instinct is to go do that with somebody you've already, especially at this point in my career where I know a lot of people and I've worked with a lot of people. Your instinct is to go do that with somebody you already know, which probably is somebody just kind of by definition that looks more like you and has been, you know, just the way the world worked out, right? And so I find myself in that same position of being someone feeling like I'm supposed to be really thoughtful about it, and I am thinking about it, and that and even that people are looking to us and are going to look to what we go do, and yet it's, you know, it's really hard to go do that, and it's, you know, it's difficult, and the same thing applies to investors. Like, I mean, it's much easier for me to be a diverse investor because my business is investing in a lot of first-time entrepreneurs, and at scale, we invest in a lot of companies and we invest in a lot of people that we know. That's fortunately because we've been doing this for a long time. But we invest in a lot of people that we have not known for a long time. But you know, most VCs, like the safest bet is to invest in somebody that you worked with already before, you've known them for a long time, like you're giving someone millions of dollars. Like, you usually want to know them pretty well, you know? Like, it's not like VCs like just randomly meeting people and writing them $10 million checks, you know? Like, they get to know you. And, you know, like, and there was just a quote I saw in the paper today, and it was from Venu at Live Oak, which is a great VC firm, and he's a great VC. And one of the things he said is something that probably most VCs would be really proud of. And he said, we've invested in 4 companies this year that were all started by serial entrepreneurs who built successful companies before. Like, that's what VCs want to go do. And yet, you just made it all white guys. Not necessarily. I'm not saying they all invested in white guys. But, like, just inherently, that's, like, kind of like, when you do that, like, well, yeah, then you're going to get everything we already got, right? But that's it's not a stupid investment, you know? Like, that's not a stupid investment strategy, is to invest in people that have done this. Anyway, it's a long answer to your question. But, so anyway, I think it's really hard to be intentional about that. And everybody's trying to figure out ways to be more intentional about that. And it's really hard.
Hello. Okay. So I had a friend of mine point out that I think it's Capital One Bank. They're doing the coffee shop thing, merge with like co-working space and all that. I'm curious, just from a Capital Factory standpoint, is that, I assume that's kind of seen as competition. Just curious how that kind of you know, all the other co-working spaces, you know, work into the ecosystem, and now you've got banks that are trying to, you know, kind of eat into the startup system. I'm just curious your general thoughts on that.
So I'm not worried about Capital One as competition, much more as a partner. I think that's more likely to be something where we could do something really interesting with them to help connect to small businesses and help them fund them and things like that, or effectively let them subsidize the things that, you know, that we're all doing. Like, well, we'll use their space too. That's fine. So I see all that as good things and not bad. I think in general, you know, part of it gets into knowing what your business really is. We have a very sophisticated, I don't mean that in like I just mean in a more complicated maybe than sophisticated, but we have a lot of different business lines that are deeply integrated and interrelated. So we have a co-working business, but nobody here, and it pays a lot of the bills because we got to pay the rent here, and a lot of it we pay from everybody who are paying rent. But that's not the business we're in. And everybody here knows that's not the business we're in. And if you, for example, the more common comparison would be to compare us to WeWork, just because they're one of the most successful, biggest co-working companies. And I think they're a great company and a great place to work. But we are in a completely different business, and we don't think of them as competition. And it can be confusing from the marketing, because if you look at their marketing, they talk a lot about community, and I think for a co-working space, they are a great community. And compared to maybe any other co-working space, and there's lots of great co-working spaces as well, they're a great community. But their business is not community. Their business is a real estate business. And their business is how much they can get per square foot for what they sell. And it's very obvious if you talk to anybody at WeWork, or you ever try to do a partnership with WeWork that suggests in any way anybody getting a free desk, that their business is selling desks, and that's what they're there to go do. And I think when somebody goes to WeWork, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for a desk or an office. And that's why you're at WeWork, is because you need a desk. And you show up and you're like, do I like this desk or that desk? And how much does that one cost? And how much does this one cost? And when you come to Capital Factory and you're part of Capital Factory, you're not actually looking for a desk. You're probably actually looking for a person. You're hoping you're going to meet your co-founder. You're hoping you're going to connect to the mentors. You're going to find someone to talk to, someone that can help you. You think you might find your first customer or your first investor, right? They're people that it's aspirational, like, and that's why you're here. And if you look at the types of spaces that we have, about 40% of our space is community space. It's not space we sell. It's space where people meet each other and where things happen. And if you look at WeWork, the percentage is very different. And if you look at the number of people that run 90,000 square feet of WeWork there, which I believe is about 4 or 5 people that are there, versus the 75 people that run about the same amount of space here, or actually less. Again, it's like, it's just, what are all these people doing, right? Like, they're doing something else. There's all this other stuff happening here. And so we don't see it as, I don't see it as competition directly. In fact, mostly what I focus on is, hopefully you can tell from my ability to say what I just said, is how do we make sure it's really clear how we're different than what those things are. And so Capital One would be like the bottom of that stack of, like, nobody's going to Capital One thinking they're going to meet any of those people. Nothing against Capital One. That just ain't what that is, you know, like, and nothing to take against WeWork, because you know what? Like, not all the companies that we invest in fit here, and they got to have somewhere to work. And I love having them right across the street at WeWork. That's great, you know, and I love going to WeWorks and other places and being able to be, you know, WeWork's awesome. It's just, it's not what we do. Now, when we first opened, we were the only co-working space in downtown. And we were that way for a while, and it was pretty nice. So we got to make up all our prices, completely arbitrary. I mean, it was just like what we thought we needed to charge, you know? Like, we weren't like making a lot of money or anything. It's just like, well, we just kind of pay the bills. But like, we got to make up all our prices, and there was no competition. It was like hard to become a customer here. If you came to the front desk and said, I want to become a member, we'd tell you to go to the website. It was like, sorry, I can't help you. Like, you need to go away, go to the website and sign up, and then maybe we'll see if you're a member. And then WeWork came to town, and they opened up a whole bunch of space right across the street, and it was nice, beautiful, and the first thing they did is offer 6 months free to anybody that wants to move in, and their pricing was probably a little bit better informed because they have other markets, and their price, turns out our desks were a little too expensive and our offices were a little too cheap, because the way we had priced it. And for a couple months, it was kind of hard, where for the first time ever, like, we weren't full all the time, and we were having to think about, like, you know, do we need to do something to get people to come in here or something, you know? Kind of took some oxygen out of the room. And then we learned some stuff, and we adjusted some things. We adjusted our pricing. I hired a salesperson. We never had to have a salesperson before. People just showed up and became members, like, and the place was full. So we had to hire someone whose job was just to be nice, to be at the front desk and, like, hey, you want to be a membership here? Let me show you around, like, and make that easy instead of telling you to go away. And so it's a couple kind of obvious things we had to go do. And then the market, you know, responded and grew. And now there's like 6 WeWorks, and they're all 3 times as big, and there's a billion other co-working spaces, and we're full. And most of them are full. Like, I mean, just there's a lot of demand for this in the marketplace. And so we don't think about that at all anymore, really. We don't think about them as competition that way. Like I said, we can't even actually fit all the companies here that we would want. And you don't have to work here to be a company that we work with. And so we don't think about it that way.
Okay, guys. Thank you very much, Josh.
So real quickly, just to mention, so my email is just josh@quityourjob.com, or I'm at Joshua Baer on Twitter, and we're all about connecting great people together. So I want to meet great entrepreneurs who we should invest in or who should be members here. I want to meet people that should be mentors here. I want to meet angel investors who want to come invest in companies here. I want to meet big companies who want to come subsidize all of you being here. So, you know, please send them our way. That's how you can help make this place be better too. And you know, I'm also really appreciative for having Startup Grind here and all of you being part of the community. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. And thanks for the space. We're pretty close to the time where we need to get out of here. I want to let you know they've got shirts for us over there that are really cool Capital Factory shirts just for us tonight. So if anybody wants to grab one on your way out, please do. And thanks so much for coming. I hope you had a good time.